Okay, welcome everyone to another SDEC session. My name is Adam Greco, and I will be your kind of behind the scenes moderator. Hopefully, many of you have been to an SDEC session before and know the drill, but we're going to do about 30 minutes of content. In this case, it's going to be in our topic area related to CDPs. And then if you have questions during the webinar, we will handle questions in a Q&A session in the last 10 or 15 minutes. So if you have a question for Todd during the session, please use the Zoom Q&A functionality that you should find at the bottom of your screen there. Please don't use the chat because those don't end up going to Todd, but use the Q&A area and we'll tackle those at the end. If you have any questions about the SDEC, or maybe you're not an official member, then you can also use the chat to talk to me. I'll be kind of looking at things behind the scenes here. And one last call to action. If you are in the SDEC, but you have not yet joined the SDEC Slack group, which we have about 30% of you who are missing, I would recommend that you join the Slack group, and I'll be putting some information in the chat on how to do that because we have now 50 past recorded sessions in the Slack group. And Slack has been nice enough to actually let us keep all of our history for the next 6 months. So they'll be around for a while. So with that, Todd, I'm going to hand it off to you. Thanks so much for presenting today.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Adam. And thanks to the SDEC for having me. I'm always happy to talk some CDP, so definitely look me up on LinkedIn if you want to continue the conversation, or on the Measure Slack as well. Today, we're here to talk about small CDP, large CDP. Perhaps after a year or so of remote learning with my kids, I'm starting to think of everything as that style of presentation. So good luck to all of us as we move along. And before we really dive in, my own obligatory introduction, I describe myself as a digital data usefulness enthusiast. I have 15 or 20 years of digital analytics and marketing experience, recently focused on customer data platforms and customer identity. I currently sit on the customer identity team at Neustar. I have recent experience leading the implementation and customer success team for the BlueConic CDP, and also sat on the product team for the Quero CDP. I've also spent over a year, maybe a year and a half, as an independent analyst researching the field of customer data platforms. I published an overview of 95 software providers back in 2018. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And really, I'm excited to be here with all of you, as my in-depth exposure to web analytics started back in 2005 with the log file analysis tool that was later acquired by Unica and IBM. So on with CDPs. So one size fits all, sometimes something that comes up in the context of software, technology, customer data platforms. And I chose this particular image, not because it looks like the bird might fit into the rhino's nostril there, but because these are two vastly different animals. And I kind of envision the rhino and the bird as two different technology buyers. They're going to have completely different needs and uses for the technology, but they might need something that more or less fits the same category. So it can be very tempting to fall into this trap of trying to define what a CDP or a customer data platform is or isn't, but there simply isn't a single definition of CDP that everyone's going to agree upon. And what's worse is that there are providers that may claim to be, the one true CDP, the best CDP, and we know this also can't really be the case. Digital analysts of all people know that every organization and business is completely different, and where there may be some common ground in the way that things are measured, there are also plenty of things that we're doing that just wouldn't work for an organization that's vastly different from ours. So coming out of my time with BlueConic, really focusing on making customers of that one specific CDP successful, and many of the customers did come on board with that issue and started driving value almost immediately. Some didn't, and sometimes the reasons were clear, sometimes they weren't. I wanted to go and see for myself what all the other CDPs out there were up to, thinking I might be able to try and help other buyers of CDPs select the right partner for their needs. And the more I dug into things, the more complexity I found, to the point where I ended up with a report that had 95 CDP technology providers across 25 categories that were based on their unique combination of strengths and capabilities. We'll dive into what some of those capabilities are in a minute. Up on the screen here, I guess you can see that what's interesting about the 25 categories. First of all, there's only 24. The top ranking category was not a CDP. And then across the others, there's just a lot of spread, meaning that there's a lot of differentiation from one CDP to the next and what their capabilities might be. So, obviously, we need to have some definition. So we try to come up with them. Consultants might choose a broad definition that kind of suits all situations. And our technology providers often like to choose a narrow definition of their technology that makes it sound like their solution is the only one out there. It's the best one. And it really matches the definition perfectly. How about that? And at the same time, we have analysts kind of mucking things up with tiered definitions, acknowledging all of the complexity in the landscape. But none of these really matter as a business. Your organization has a unique set of data management requirements, and your organization has a unique set of customer data and marketing use cases. So the definition of what a CDP is for you has to revolve around that. So I guess the way that I'm thinking of small CDP, large CDP today is that we should be trying to consider two definitions of a CDP. There's this small definition. What's a customer data platform software? It's rather unimportant. The large definition is the key. And that one really helps us understand what is or what should be our organization's customer data platform. So there have been hours and hours and hours spent talking about what customer data platform software is. But the important one, what is and what should be your organization's customer data platform? Unfortunately, there's not a ton of help out there for this. So we can try to talk about that a little bit today. I'm also, as Adam mentioned, happy to take questions. So as we get towards the end here, we should be able to take questions. Really anything that you have based on what CDPs are capable of, what they're doing, what I've seen gone wrong or gone right. I'd be happy to talk about it. For now, let's dive into this area of trying to determine what the organization's customer data platform looks like. It's definitely not going to be easy. There are separate orbits of goals and requirements. Like we're all aware of the separate orbits. In fact, if there were a lovely image like this one that had 4 orbits in it that I could split marketing, analytics, IT, and compliance all across their own separate orbits with overlap, of course, because sometimes there's alignment in our orbits of goals and requirements. But if I could split them all out there, I would. At the same time, there's some kind of commonalities between what marketing and analytics might need and what IT and compliance might need from a customer data platform. So really the only way in my mind to move forward, whether a customer data platform has been implemented or not, if this exercise hasn't been done, documenting, categorizing, prioritizing the goals and requirements of a customer data platform, not the software, but all the people and the technology and infrastructure that support anything that touches customer data. That's what needs to be documented, categorized, and prioritized. So not easy, but just for some examples of what folks are going to be listing out. IT, common goal or requirement for IT is to ensure high accessibility for systems and the teams that need data. So, obviously IT doesn't want to stand between marketing and data, but sometimes it's just the way that things have become. So IT's one of their primary goals often is to ensure that high accessibility for systems and teams that need the data. They also don't want to sacrifice in privacy and security. That's where they're sitting in that same orbit at this slide. With compliance, their friends in compliance might have a goal and requirement that they're able to ensure total governance over each data set, as well as the records and fields that are being shared with internal and external teams. Clients wants to know what's going on. They want to make sure that if data is going off to a clean room, it's actually clean. And there's been discussion around what that means. Marketing, aside from the access to data, which 100% is a life changer for marketing, ensuring that real-time data could be taken into account for lights on campaigns, a very common kind of use case for marketing. We all want to avoid those situations where someone's pointing at our brand saying, I already bought this thing. Why are you talking to me about this thing? And analytics wants a lack of black boxes. We want to know how things are done. We want to have access to as much raw data as possible. And we want to be able to bring our own models. So just with a few example goals, the end result, if we were to list all these out, it's not something that a single piece of software is going to manage. So again, I think that the large CDP definition is the one that matters. In a way, every organization is stuck now building their own CDP. And going down to this level of detail is going to help determine which CDP software will be useful, to what extent. It'll help drive discussions with those technologies around where the development investments need to be made. And most importantly, all of this painful work represents internal alignment and organization around your customer data initiative. So it's never wasted time when you're able to get folks together. The trick is getting those folks together. So the CDP itself, the software side, the small CDP is absolutely complex, and it can be used to plug in so many of the gaps in your large CDP. That's what they were designed for. It isn't really an accident that CDPs were developed to kind of line up with the categories of needs. So CDPs kind of speak to marketing, and they speak to analytics, and they speak to IT and compliance, or at least they try to. And there are some really good definitions out there that have become succinct. For example, the CDP Institute has backed down, I think, a little bit in their definition of a customer data platform to insert gasp here, completely remove the word analytics from their definition. So the CDP Institute has a real CDP certification that they offer. It breaks down the capabilities of a CDP as a system that ingests data from any source, captures full detail of ingested data, and stores that ingested data indefinitely. So the first 3 out of 5 bullets are all just about ingesting the data, capturing that full detail, and storing it indefinitely. It's all really related to collection and storage. The last 2 bullet points create unified profiles of the individuals and share data with any system that needs it. So the CDP Institute has skipped over the third kind of bar in my graphic here, which I find interesting, because the other, all the analyst firms have always had some component of analytics in there. And I don't think that David and the CDP Institute are incorrect, but I think what they're doing is maybe acknowledging the fact that analytics isn't something that the CDP brings to the table. Analytics exists, and the CDP is going to perhaps help feed analytics, and analytics is going to be heavily involved with the operation of the CDP. But there is something interesting there where the CDP itself, it's not going to align with the data visualization tools that you have today. You have better data visual, more for the most part. And that's also something that I think is always fun to talk about with customer data platforms. We talk about one size fits all doesn't work, but yet here we are trying to talk to, I don't know, 80 or 100 people probably about customer data platforms. So I definitely look forward to questions. Sorry. So getting back to the analytics being ripped out of David's definition of a CDP Institute, or the CDP Institute's definition of a CDP, excuse me. It's not that analytics isn't involved in a CDP so much as I think that he's simplifying its use case within the CDP. So to get to my graphic on the screen, what I'm showing is that there are these 4 areas of capabilities that CDPs have. And I think the Gartners and the Forresters more or less align with this one way or another, that the names might be slightly different. So CDP has data collection capabilities, and it has data unification capabilities, and it has analytics capabilities, and it has data delivery capabilities. But each CDP is going to have varying degrees or depth within each of those areas. And so when a system leans harder towards the left side of this spectrum, when they're better at collection and unification or data management, they tend to be more of an infrastructural CDP. And when a CDP leans more towards the right of these capabilities, more on the analytics and delivering data to other systems for experience, then they're experienced CDPs. And so just to kind of go into each of these areas as quick examples, for collection, ingestion only is the most basic level of data collection, meaning that the CDP is able to take in data that already exists. And maybe it takes that into a single cloud, or it might even force you to ingest that data in a specific format. So it can be very rigid as far as the way that collection works. Or on the other end of the spectrum, it could be wide open, supporting multiple clouds, data lakes, unstructured data with SDKs and APIs, so that data from just about any system that your customers are touching, data is going to be able to be firing back into your CDP or your data lake, as it were. On the unification front, some CDPs, all they're really capable of is simple stitching. So if you have an email address, for example, in your CRM, and you know a bunch of information about your customers, that person goes to your website and they log in. Well, the CDP might be able to stitch the data together from the website to the data in the CRM and say, here's what your most loyal shoppers are doing on your website, versus here's what people who haven't bought yet but are actually logged in users are doing. So CDPs might do some simple stitching like that. On the other end of the spectrum, it could be much more complex. A couple of different examples of that might be taking in external data as a reference data set. So let's say the email address in the CRM doesn't match the email address that the user is using on the website. But they do use both of those email addresses enough to the point where an external data source knows that these two email addresses are the same person. You reference that external data set, and then you have something that goes a little bit beyond simple stitching. If you're able to trace the resolution and use it in multiple contexts, for example, you might want looser, goosier rules. Is that a term? Looser, goosier rules on your website, for targeting certain messages to a person as they're navigating a website. Once that person's called on the phone, perhaps you want to be a little bit more careful about exactly which data you're sharing with or using in some of that personalization. So the levels of authentication might be different, and so you might actually recognize the same individual in more than one context. In analytics, at the very simple end of the spectrum, just basic segmentation and reporting, an ability to group like users and push those like users out to other systems, basically. So simple clustering. On the other end of the spectrum, some CDPs were built for analytics use cases, and they're very strong with their own proprietary machine learning and AI use cases, and they also allow you to bring your own models. So there's an awful lot there, but I think as the CDP Institute also kind of points out, those things can exist outside the CDP. There's absolutely no reason often for them to reside within the software CDP when they could just as easily reside alongside the software CDP, constantly reading and writing data to the same places. And delivery, on the most basic end of the spectrum, as the real CDP definition says, it shares data with any system that needs it. That can be as basic as having an API and being able to open up a bucket or an SFTP server or something and say, well, any system that can get this data can read it, so we can connect to anything. But really on the more complex end of that, there are direct connections being made to technical partners. There's orchestration built directly into some of the CDPs. So some of the kind of campaign management and orchestration features that take up or consume an entire software category can also be found sometimes within CDPs. So the confusion kind of continues at that point. So the point with all that is really just that not only do we need to define what our goals and requirements are, we have to have those mapped out. We need to be able to understand and identify the tools that are going to be able to help with that, and kind of know our lanes, if you will. So I think one question that comes up, and I see that there are a couple of questions in there already, which is great. I'm going to jump over there in a minute. One question that comes up often is, there's a CDP that was just bought, and I'm in what does this mean? Why do I wasn't really part of this, and now there just is one. So what are we supposed to do with it? And so I guess the first thing I would say is definitely have an open mind. There can be great things that come of the customer data platform. I think it can have some negative connotations, because if the CDP does its own data collection, and we've already done all this work on data collection, it's very hard to hear sometimes that there's new software coming in that wants to collect data differently. So, being able to kind of go into those conversations, knowing that might be something that's happening, and being able to talk to how your existing, tagging or other infrastructure could actually be used, so that all systems are receiving and understanding the same data. Those conversations, I think being prepared for those and getting out in front of them as soon as we know that a CDP is in place. We're not going down some implementation path that the CDP is driving. We are holding up, and as an organization, recognizing that we've done an immense amount of work in analytics that needs to be propagated out to this customer data platform. As I sip on a drink really quick, I'm going to pull up the Q&A. So I have Isaiah Adams saying, most CDPs evaluated focus on selling the collection features rather than unification and delivery. There's already a data warehouse and strong data collection practices. In your experience, are most people using CDPs for the standardized data collection or unification and delivery? So it's always tricky with most, especially because the first few years of my CDP life, if you will, were spent on the experience side, where we preferred, generally speaking, we preferred to just get moving and get stuff done with the marketing team. It wasn't always the case that from the software side, we were focusing on making sure that the data collection, data that was being collected that was then being passed to the CDP, we didn't have much vision into that. So I always look at it as kind of many people started with CDPs on the experience side because it was easy and fast. And the infrastructure side is slowly kind of picking up as folks are finding needs to move massive amounts of data across clouds or whatever it might be. If there's some kind of processing that has to happen in between, it starts getting messy. That's where I think some of the CDPs are helping. But if you already have the data warehouse and strong collection practices, the only thing that often a CDP is offering is an automated or like a procedural path to adding more data. It can be that they both have like direct connections to systems, or they have their own ways of collecting data that are worth looking at. Depending on what you're doing and what they're doing, I think it's always good to compare. Make sure that the data that you're collecting is going to make its way into the CDP in the same way that the data they'd be collecting. Does it all work for real-time use cases and all that? And that's where sometimes you end up having to duplicate things like data that's being sent to your analytics tools or other marketing software might, you have to sometimes send that data to multiple places so that the real-time stuff can happen. Anonymous attendee is asking who should be doing the stitching, marketing, analytics, or IT? That's a great question. So this is a small CDP, large CDP question. In the small CDP, then I think marketing can do it. They're just saying, we want software to do this thing. We're going to have to stitch some data together and we're going to run with it. I don't think it's necessarily the right path as an organization. I think the right path as an organization is probably for IT and marketing analytics to be talking about that together, because there's different types of stitching. The IT is going to be able to help with certain levels of stitching that the marketing team might not be able to help with, for example. Gavin's asking, how important is it to differentiate between all signal collection, which would be done for most data warehousing, versus relevant signal collection within CDP ingestion? Should signals be relevant to behavioral outcomes in the orchestration stage? Yeah, I mean, this is a good one too, because we're talking about customer data platform. And if we talk about the large CDP that encompasses all things customer data, then yeah, so all signal collection, sometimes that can mean business data that wouldn't possibly come up within the context of customers or experience or anything. So, how important it is to differentiate is questionable. I guess it just depends on where the organizations are. Some can collect all the data they want and don't have to really think about how much they're paying for storage or whatever. But if you're at that point, then certainly keeping data in places that it doesn't need to be is never that great, especially if there's tons of it. Relevant, one other kind of point, I guess, is that relevant signal collection can be difficult to understand. So one of my kind of pet peeves as a web analytics implementation person back in the day was that I didn't necessarily think it was fair to put on an implementation person or a marketer or anybody which data is going to produce a relevant signal before it has been collected. So then you end up in a situation where you're trying to collect as much as you can on the onset, determine what's useful, and then pair off the things that are not useful based on cost, I guess. What percent of CDPs provide data governance and privacy controls? Yes. So is this functionality table stakes or a real differentiator? So Stuart also mentions, as PII is necessarily a part of these systems, is this functionality table stakes or a real differentiator? I like that you said that, because there are a couple of CDPs out there, or technology providers that call themselves CDPs, that don't work with PII. They it's insane to me that that's a thing, but I can still see where there's some value for some folks, especially if they're not dealing with customer data. So I get it. At any rate, sorry for that. Is it table stakes? No. Is it a differentiator? I don't think so, because most of the systems out there, if they have any kind of capabilities in these areas, they are lacking from a holistic standpoint. They check some boxes, but often when you really think about what's happening, if you want to do some of these things, like forgetting a person, the system would need to be set up in a different way. Like removing a person's profile is different from going back into all the source data systems and striking things, for example. So yeah, that one's tricky, I think. Where do I see CDP in 5 years? Is it a must-have tool in MarTech stack? Yes, but the problem is that the CDP, I think, takes on a couple of different shapes. It's like the infrastructural shape and the experience shape. And then those shapes need to be molded by the industry a little bit. So restaurants as one example, e-commerce as another example, and CPG as a third example. Let's throw financial services in as a fourth example. They need such different things that it wouldn't be bad for there to be CDPs that branch off and specialize in industry or verticals. I do think it'll be a must-have tool in the MarTech stack. I just think it's going to keep changing. There's a constant grab for data and for managing what's happening with that data. So various tools keep adding features and kind of confusing things. But in the end, if everything is about, let's say, IT, compliance, marketing, and analytics working together and making sure that customer data is handled properly, it's being leveraged in a way that's useful for everybody, then a platform or multiple CDPs are going to be required to make that happen. I don't think that there is technology that existed 5 years ago that would help us with some of the problems that we have now and that are growing here in the next 5 years. How does the CDP segment data to a third-party vendor in order to deliver a campaign? Can it be done in real time? Segmentation in order to get data as per the requirement. So let me make sure I'm understanding fully. How does the CDP segment data to a third-party vendor in order to deliver a campaign? There are a couple different ways that happens. It depends on the relationships that might be there. With no relationships at all, even then, often the CDP is able to take built segments of customers and ship off hashed email addresses or something like that to the third-party vendor. Whatever identifiers that third-party vendor is accepting, hopefully the CDP has been configured to have those collected or as part of the ID resolution scheme. Can it be done in real time? It should be. A lot of times, getting things over to third party is done in batch, but it can also, you can certainly be sending signals directly off to the third party, for example, to take those folks out of the lights on campaigns. Hopefully I've understood and answered that one appropriately. Puneet's asking, would trying to figure out when a user used loyal points on a transaction with a partner fall under orchestration? To what extent is this built into CDPs available today? So orchestration often is talking about the delivery of experiences like next best action kind of things, where whether or not a user used loyalty points on a transaction, I think we're hoping that does come from the partner. So that getting partners' data back is like, maybe I'm seeing where there's confusion, is the word orchestration. The word orchestration gets used on both ends of the spectrum. So sometimes it's used, or maybe traditionally, it's used as the next best action. That's where journey orchestration comes up a lot. On the infrastructural side of the spectrum, data orchestration is extremely important as well. That's where we're talking about the multi-clouds or even just moving data around between your internal and external clouds. That type of orchestration, I might have missed that original question. I would consider that to be that type of orchestration, definitely. Companies that create CDP-like solutions in-house. What about them? Like cloud storage and cataloging, stitching analysis, microservice deployment. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things about that. One is a lot of companies have already built those types of things for themselves. So especially folks on this call are probably well aware of things like this that have been going on for maybe a decade, maybe more. The fact that they've been built doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the same benefits of having a CDP in place, because the CDPs are gap pluggers, whereas the technology that you've built plug the gap. So the CDP is going to keep plugging gaps. Your technology plug the gap that no longer exists. So as marketers and IT and analytics and other folks are connecting to more platforms and more data is coming from more places and needs to go to more places, sometimes the in-house stuff either it breaks down or it needs to be expanded to take in these use cases of what happens when there's a new data set and we need to get it joined up with everything else fast. Sometimes a CDP is a good way to do that. Somebody who doesn't have a CDP but has a DMP, how important would you see data activation in real time as a reason to transition to CDP? Pretty important. Sorry, I didn't put my screen on my mic today. I could keep hearing myself pop. How important would you see the data activation in real time as a reason? Yeah, so if data activation in real time is already critical, then at the least, future looking DMPs, and I know that they all want full disclosure, I technically work for a DMP at this point. So there are DMPs that are completely out of water right now because of cookies and maids going away. And then there are DMPs that already had alternate solutions and are continuing to find ways to supplement their data so that you'll continue to be able to use a DMP. I guess the question there is, if you have customer data, then it probably does make sense to consider transitioning. If there is no customer data, that's where it gets tricky. I assume that in this case, there is some customer data, and if there isn't one in place, but you're working with a DMP, a CDP is going to help you bridge the gaps that are coming up and have already begun to come up. Leanne's asking, how long does it typically take to implement within a small versus large organization? That does also kind of depend a little bit on the infrastructure versus experience side of the CDP. I'm glad I never moved off this slide. On the experience side, a lot of times you're able to implement rather quickly. That's the point of the experience CDPs is usually to solve some pain point where actually it's exactly what got me excited about CDPs a while back. Was I had been driving insights and analytics for so long and had ideas, and even the web team would agree and have ideas, but we couldn't always get the ideas off the ground because there wasn't an end-to-end solution that would let us kind of measure and activate on the measurement and collection all in one. So some of those systems are able to be stood up and implemented within days, but that's not the holistic capital L large CDP. And usually it's a smaller organization doing that. I will say that that's not solely the case. There's value in large organizations running off and doing this kind of thing too. And so, so certainly it happens. For the data on the infrastructural side, data management, it could be 6 to 12 months, I think, easily for a CDP implementation, because of all the moving parts, massive amounts of data, the potential for new cloud setup, all kinds of things that can be taking place there. I think on the infrastructural side, I don't know what the percentage is, but it is pretty high, I think, where eventually the organization needs that they're not even structured properly to take on a CDP implementation. So it is a time to pause and consider all things when you're going into the CDP space, especially on the infrastructural side. Got an anonymous question, oversimplification. Can I call the CDP the car engine and all the use cases as driver functions and behavior? Yeah, not necessarily. I think that unfortunately the CDP is it's the car, and the engine is part of the car, and you can swap the engine out or swap components out. It's like a custom vehicle, because I do think of it as the small versus the large CDP. I would say the development of CDPs has been driven as the use case, driven by the use cases, and that's where we ended up early with so many CDPs that were so focused on experience. And I do think that they need to back up a little bit and help out on the infrastructural side. Shall the CDP replace the classical tag management products like GTM or Launch? I don't think so, because those tools, while they are largely used for the collection of customer data, I like to think of them as collecting business data and other experience or other data that may or may not come into place with the CDP. Also, the CDP doesn't have to be the collector. If you're getting great data from Adobe and that data is showing up quick enough within the CDP, then the CDP can focus on being able to move piles of that data from one cloud to another for another team in another country or something like that.
Cool. Well, Todd, we got through a record 13 number of questions. So there's clearly a lot of excitement and questions in the CDP area as we're all learning about it. So any other last things you wanted to share before we sign off?
No, just I guess that I really do find these, this wasn't even much of a conversation until the end. I appreciate your questions. I find the conversations about CDPs to be enjoyable. I'm on the Measure Slack. I'm also on LinkedIn. If anybody has questions, I'm always happy to answer. If I don't get it back immediately, it's probably just because I'm homeschooling. 8 weeks left.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you everyone for joining. A recording of this session will be posted into the CDP channel in the SDEC Slack group. And Todd, thank you so much for coming on and taking all the questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Adam. I appreciate it. And thanks you all for your time.
Okay, have a good week, everyone.
Take care.